Chinese state media wasted little time in offering their views after the UK announced that Huawei would have to withdraw from telecoms in the country. The Chinese media says the reaction and the response should be public and painful for the United Kingdom. You'll recall that Britain has decided Huawei will not be allowed to take part in the country's 5G network, and in a correlation to that, it'll have to withdraw all its equipment in 2, 3 and 4G. It has banned it from taking part. Meanwhile, Huawei is in the American crosshairs again. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo singled out Huawei and announcing new visa restrictions.
State Department will impose visa restrictions on certain employees of Chinese technology companies like Huawei that provide material support to regimes engaging in human rights violations and abuses globally.
Andy Purdy is the Chief Security Officer for Huawei in the USA. Andy Purdy joins me live from Washington. Does Huawei believe, like Chinese state media and those representing government bodies, does Huawei believe that the Chinese response to the UK should be, in their words, public and painful?
I certainly don't think there should be any escalation. I don't think there should be any retaliation by the China government. I think escalation in these situations is a huge mistake. I think we've got to start having discussions. In this case, the U.S. government and the China government need to have some serious conversations. And at some point, the U.S. government needs to be willing to talk directly to Huawei. But right now, the geopolitical situation has made the U.S. government unwilling to talk with us.
Well, far from talking to you, it's getting worse. You heard that some of your executives will have visa restrictions and visa difficulties, more visa difficulties than before. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's really unjustified and it's unfair. And when you look at, for example, we were talking about the UK decision, that the UK was never convinced by any so-called evidence that the US government brought to them. And in fact, when you look around the world, I only know of one allegation by the U.S. government against Huawei, and that information was declassified, and the U.S. government refuses to turn it over, and that's just crazy. And so this kind of action to retaliate, to try to hurt China by hurting Huawei is really unjustified, and the U.S. and China need to start having talks, because despite the vast differences, there's some major issues in the world that need to be addressed between those two governments.
I heard you on the radio in Britain this morning defending the Huawei position. But the reality is that, to a certain extent, nobody's listening. I mean, they're listening politely, but nobody's paying attention or going to give credence, because the received wisdom is that Huawei is a risk and a danger because information can be obtained by the Chinese authorities. It's as simple as that.
Well, the fact is, as we've done in the U.S. and elsewhere, we can prove, and it's subject to the strict controls by the telecom and mobile operators, we can prove that we are not improperly accessing data. We are not improperly sending data back to anyone. So by doing that, we can prove the Chinese government has not forced us to do that. And those are facts. That's what our competitors should be doing. And that's the kind of thing that we believe the U.S. government should be willing to listen to. And a fact-based approach to addressing risk, that's what the U.K. government and many other governments believe in. The U.S. government just doesn't believe in that because of the geopolitical situation.
But the reality here is, I mean, as you were the first to mention, as I heard you say this morning, that this is going to cost the UK 2 to 3 years on 5G, and it's going to cost several $billion. Now, a government doesn't hobble its own country unless either it's been nobbled by the United States or there is a real risk of eavesdropping and spying. So which is it? Has the UK government been nobbled?
Well, the U.S. government has been swinging a really big stick around the world for about 18 months. The U.K. government has come up with a risk-informed, objective approach to addressing risk that's worked very well. And the additional restrictions that the U.S. government has placed on Huawei to hurt China by hurting Huawei has forced the UK government. We hope they'll reconsider that decision, but it's a fairly complex issue because of the US sanctions that have been put in place, that the risk can still be addressed. But it's not because of what President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo said. They said, well, this is evidence that the UK government is coming to believe that Huawei is an arm of the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party. And the UK government said no such thing.
So, finally, the Five Eyes governments, of course, the Five Eyes nations that share information, the mere talk of the UK joining or using Huawei had other countries like New Zealand, like Australia, saying that they would have doubts about on-passing of intelligence. You have an uphill task. Again, I say to you, however much you say, nobody is believing that in some shape or form in the future, if not now, but in the future, that Huawei could not be pressured by the Chinese government to pass on material and data.
The fact is, there are 5 nations of the world, including the US and China, who have the ability to virtually hack into networks and systems around the world. You may have heard of the Crypto AG story recently, the Swiss company that CIA took control of, that allows the US government to spy and break the encryption of every country in the world except for China and Russia. The fact is, in the US, if it weren't for double standards, there'd be no standards at all. The processes are in place. The telecom and mobile operators know them. The UK government knows them, that can guarantee and prove that Huawei is not improperly accessing data and not improperly sending it back to anyone.
Andy Purdy, thank you for joining us. I'm sure you will agree that it is important that we keep hearing from, obviously, from the Huawei side. And I'm grateful that you've been on Quest Means Business tonight to do just that, sir. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.